All right, so this is going to be a slightly different series to our normal podcast, but what we're going to do is something that we're going to call deep quotes, where we find weird quotes online that sometimes either seem really stupid or really smart. Either way, there seems to be an arbitrary idea behind the quote of, yeah, this totally makes sense. And we're going to try and break it down and show that it's a little bit more complicated if you dig under the surface. For this, we have more than just myself, D, and the co-host, App. We have a third person.
Hi, I'm Pod.
And if you catch where we're going with this, yes, we will be adding a fourth person eventually called Cast, but that'll be in a future episode. So we'll get to that in a couple episodes. In the meantime, it's time to start deep quotes. The first quote that we're going to cover has to do with someone who had life in prison, or was sentenced to life in prison, and died, but he's still alive. So what the quote that we're going to talk about is, quote, Schreiber is either still alive, in which case he must remain in prison, or he is actually dead, in which case this appeal is moot. End quote. And what they're talking about is the person who died in prison was resuscitated and is now suing the prison for resuscitating him and keeping him alive, and also saying, well, I died, so I served my life term, right? So what do you guys think of that?
I mean, I think there's a couple of interesting pieces to this particular case. The most notable of which is that the man had a DNR order signed.
Which stands
DNR
for?
means do not resuscitate. It means if you go to a doctor's office and you die, they're not supposed to do anything to resuscitate you, but they did. And they actually did 5 times, which
so not
feels
only
excessive.
So not only was he already in the prison system for life in prison and had a do not resuscitate, meaning if I die, let me stay dead. He's explicitly said that. They revived him 5 times to keep him alive.
Correct.
Which is definitely excessive.
It's excessive and suspicious that you would not just revive him once, but after, let's say, the second or third time, by that time you have medical records or you have the medical authorities aware of what's going on. His medical record must be pulled up. The DNR is going to be right there on the medical record. So they should know very well this guy doesn't want to be resuscitated. Mm-hmm. So I question the motives of the people that were resuscitating him. Regardless of the lawsuit of, should this guy go free or not, why were they trying so hard to keep him alive when he specifically said, I don't want to be kept alive?
Right. It's definitely questionable. And this guy did have life in prison. So if he wasn't resuscitated, his life would have ended, which would have served a sentence.
Which, in a way, is what he wanted. He didn't want to kill himself. He didn't want to end his life, but he didn't want to be revived should that circumstance come up. The reason I say it's really, really questionable is because with the prison system, there is profit that, like in the United States at least, we have a private prison system, which means people do gain profit off of prisoners. That's both in terms of state subsidies as well as work from the prisoners. So if he is being kept alive against his will, explicitly against his will because he had the do not resuscitate, and they're keeping him alive and they're gaining money from him, is that indentured slavery?
I mean, it could definitely be seen that way. And I think on that particular point about him being resuscitated in the DNR, that is a place where he may very well have a case.
Mm-hmm.
On the part of...
And that's a medical malpractice case.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think that is separate, though, from the issue of him being in prison after he, quote, died and was resuscitated, because at what point do we consider someone dead?
Right. So before we get to that, let's kind of try and close off the whole slavery thing. And I realize it's a big topic to close off, but we're trying to move through quotes faster than our normal episode lengths so that it doesn't become a 2-hour discussion. If the prison benefits from a person's life and they go against that person's life or that person's choices on whether or not they want to live, do they have a potential legitimate case that should be taken to the courts?
I think so.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that should be considered, and it should be the costs should be covered by the prison system because they're the ones that benefit from the person. They're the ones that made the decision. They're the ones that, and the guy wasn't free, so he doesn't really have bearing over what happens to him when he's dead. So I think that should fall to the prison system. The costs should fall to the prison system. Agreed?
Yeah, that makes
that's
sense.
fair.
Gives them incentive to respect people's wishes. All right. Now to move on to the other portion of this, which is he's dead. Did he serve his life sentence?
I mean, I think that depends on how you see resuscitation. Is it another life?
So I have frequently heard, and I don't know what the official legal wording is, but when they sentence you, they may say the words, quote, you are sentenced to life imprisonment for the rest of your natural life, end quote. If they say that, resuscitation is an artificial process, meaning that it would no longer be part of your natural life.
Right, in which case it would kind of make sense for him to go free after that. As weird as that sounds.
So if the wording on his sentence is for the rest of your natural life, does that mean that once someone gets resuscitated, they can get out of life in prison?
I mean, that opens up the whole can of worms of like, okay, I'm in prison and I don't want to be here anymore. I'm going to find a way to kill myself, have someone resuscitate me, and wow, I'm out of prison now.
Or try to kill yourself, and then either you're dead, or if you happen to be resuscitated, well, you guys ended my natural life. My natural life was ended. Now it's an artificial one. Okay, cool.
Yeah, that's kind of a bad incentive here.
It opens the door for abuse and a way out of gaming the system.
I mean, I can also see, though, on the flip side, that if you say, okay, if you're in life in prison, then you automatically have a DNR. We will not resuscitate you, whatever.
What if I'm pleading not guilty and I want to be resuscitated because I hope that if evidence will eventually show itself to show me to be not guilty?
Yeah, that would be bad. Or another case would be, okay, what if you get stabbed and you get badly injured? And they just assume you're going to die.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what if you don't die? Now you're maimed. And torture, I believe, is still illegal in this country.
True. What do you mean specifically by torture?
Letting someone sit there in agony. They've been badly injured.
So they're not actively being tortured. They're just being left there in pain.
Yeah. Because you're serving life in prison, and if you die, then you're dead and we don't have to worry about you.
So the opt-in-ness of do not resuscitate as it relates to life and parole needs to be considered, and I'm sure it has been considered, but the question is, to what degree? Like should we just let people that have do not resuscitate bleed out from a small injury that could be fixed?
Which, that just seems wrong.
But if I chose not to, if I chose do not resuscitate and then I slit my wrists, should I be allowed to bleed out? Because I said, I am trying to kill myself. Don't resuscitate me. I have life in prison.
I think that's a harder question.
Let me make it an easier question. If people have life in prison, one of the big questions is, well, why don't we just kill them? If they're never going to get out anyway, life without parole, why don't we just execute them? And there's a whole question of capital punishment, which I don't think we need to get into, but assuming that capital punishment is an option, and instead of going for capital punishment, you go for life in prison, generally it's because the judicial process to verify execution as an option is really, really hard. It takes, at least in the United States, a couple of years to get the certification to execute someone, to make sure that we don't accidentally kill someone that's innocent or pressure them into a pleading guilty charge so that we can execute them. But if we're giving them life in prison and they say, no, I don't want to spend life in prison, I choose death penalty. What do you guys think of that choice?
I think it would be interesting. I don't necessarily think that would inherently make the process move any faster, because you would have to get a lot of psychiatrists involved to make sure that this person truly understands what they're getting into.
Right, we'd have to treat it similar to assisted suicide in a lot of cases, where we have to make sure it's right. Right,
but I think it's an easier case. It's an easier edge case for assisted suicide because in assisted suicide, many times the case is, well, you have some sort of terminal illness or a degenerative illness. It's very similar in that regard, but it's like you are not going to be getting out of this for the rest of your life. There's not going to be a cure, and particularly if there's surmounting evidence against you and you're pleading guilty voluntarily and you're not just taking a plea deal, because why would you take a plea deal for life in prison?
Right. That's not great.
Mhm. But like on the flip side, you have people that they maybe just got caught or they just got put in prison. They're depressed. They're suicidal as it is.
Or they could be
They are
pressured
like-
into taking the suicide
Yeah.
option.
Yeah. They're like, hey, my life isn't worth anything right now. I'm just going to die. Even if they were innocent or could get out in the future.
And there is a potential good that could come of this, that if someone is put on death row, or not on death row, in life in prison, and we say, look, you can either serve out your term, which is a perfectly valid option, or you can donate your body to medical and science. Meaning like donate your organs to people that need them, particularly hearts and lungs that...
I doubt that they would actually accept those, though. The way that we kill people, the organs would be useless.
Which is why I'm saying, well, I mean, we can change that of, in this particular instance where you are perfectly healthy, but we're going to use your organs for medical purposes, put them under anesthesia, start taking the organs out, and at that point you're running completely off machines, and you will not survive once the machines are turned off.
Mm-hmm.
So it solved we would no longer have to use lethal injection or the electric chair or whatever other forms of execution there are, because once your organs are taken out, you're done.
So there's a little problem with that one as well, which is the rest of the world. They already look at the U.S. as being barbaric for killing people. If we started harvesting the organs of inmates
Well, then we'd look
while
like
they're still alive,
then we'd look like China.
or worse.
And yeah, there are very much ways that this can be abused.
Mm-hmm.
That we could end up having a judicial system where we more frequently go for the death penalty because it means that we can harvest organs. That is a very dark dystopian future that could result from this.
Mm-hmm.
So
you frame a person that has your blood type, make them want to kill themselves. Hey, look, I get a free new heart.
you can frame someone and steal their organs legally, which would be terrifying. But does that mean that in order to protect against the ability to abuse the system, that we should just say, regardless of whether or not we have assisted suicide for people that have been condemned to life in prison, they cannot donate their organs? Or make it similarly difficult to execution?
I mean, I would like them to be able to donate their organs because then at least we can get some good out of it.
And I would say, given how difficult it already is to get someone executed, at least in the United States, the amount of evidence that you have to have, and it takes, I think, 5 years, sometimes 10 years to go through the judicial process of doing that, that by that time, the person that's framing you is probably going to be dead if they need your organs.
Yeah, if they were in desperate need of a new heart, they're not going to survive that long.
So how about this? Does it make sense that if you are facing life in prison versus death row and you're given life in prison, can you choose death row, and after a certain amount of time that can be granted? So there's a waiting period to make sure it's not just initial depression, give a resting period for other information that could arise from the case, and make sure that they're certain of their decision. And if they were framed, then the person that would have needed the organs, it's already too late, they would be dead. Is a waiting period what would make that valid, of having assisted suicide for people facing life in prison?
I could see that working pretty well.
Yeah, I think that would resolve a lot of the problems of initial depression being the cause for it, or there being some kind of other abuse.
And to kind of bring it back to what the original quote was about, which was serving a life term, what about, because I think that kind of covers up the whole assisted suicide section of this. At what point is a life term in prison fulfilled?
So legally speaking, it would be when a medical examiner declares you dead.
But that could open up for corruption. Of a medical examiner could declare you dead, and then if you get revived, now you're alive again.
Exactly.
So you could. Generally, they're not going to declare you dead immediately upon you passing.
Or being clinically dead, which means that your heart has stopped.
Mm-hmm.
But regardless of those circumstances, if a person has died, their heart has stopped, and if left alone, they would be dead, and they are revived, that's the end of your natural life, if you want to think of it like that, because you were unnaturally brought back or artificially brought back. Is that the point of the end of the life sentence, or should it be life sentence means if you are alive, you are in prison?
I think it's more the second one.
I lean more towards the first one.
And why is that?
Just because the circumstances of you being able to be brought back, it's actually relatively uncommon.
Mm-hmm.
So, in the first place, like, very few people are going to have a chance at coming back after they die.
And if they go through the low probability of dying clinically in a prison and being resuscitated, despite the fact that that could have abuses of people trying to kill themselves, and then when they're resuscitated, oh, well, we got you back alive, but that means that you're free, that could be abused.
But there are certain types of drugs that can be used to stop your heart and simulate death.
That too.
So
you can be clinically dead, and then once the drugs wear off, it can start up, or...
Yeah, you'd come back to life.
Take an adrenaline shot. So you just go into prison, find the 10 people that are serving life sentences that you were bought off by.
Give them the drug, make it appear that their heart has stopped, and then their heart just randomly starts back up again.
Yep. Oh no, all 10 of them died. Hey look, all 10 of them are alive. Their life sentence is over.
Yeah, which doesn't work.
Back on the
So
streets.
you want to rethink that position there, App?
It would need a lot of help to actually be implemented well, I think. It's not something we could go into lightly.
Right. And I would agree with that, just like we can't go into the idea of assisted suicide in the prison system lightly either. But I think that, personally, if I were for some reason sentenced to life in prison, and it was because I was guilty and I admitted to that guilt, I would probably rather have the potential for assisted suicide, because it's like, I'm going to be here for the rest of my life. I would rather not live that life. And I think that it being an option, and us being careful of how that option is worded and implemented in terms of not making it friendly to abusers or framers of trying to steal a person's organs. So like having a very long wait period in it, making sure that it's only for people that pled guilty to life in prison and actively chose it. I think it's a potential option.
I can agree with that.
And there's a lot of danger in letting people out after they were declared dead but then revived. But also that if someone is revived and they said, don't revive me, they have a legitimate case regardless, and they should be able to sue the prison on the prison system's dollar, because they're basically condemning you to prison and slavery even after you were dead.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the DNR definitely made this one tricky.
Yes. So, any other points?
I think we covered it.
Cool. So once again, just in case you've forgotten what the quote was, Schreiber is either still alive, in which case he must remain in prison, or he is actually dead, in which case this appeal is moot. If you want to see the full story, we'll have a link to it in the description. Other than that, thanks for listening.